Welcome back. I've got Nick Halaris on the line. Nick, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Michael. Thanks so much for having me on.
Really looking forward to this conversation. You do some absolutely amazing work, and I look at I'm like, okay, what's the one thing that Nick does? And it's like there isn't just one thing. There's a bunch. So why don't you share a little bit about you for those that aren't familiar with your work, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying that. And I appreciate what you do as well. I've been enjoying listening to episodes of your podcast and even some of your appearances on other podcasts to kind of learn how you became the chief burnout officer. It's a cool story. But I've been doing a lot of things. Actually, my something funny happened to me the other day at school, my kid's school, where one of the parents is like, "Oh, you're retired, right?" And I was like, no, I'm not retired. I just happen to be at the school all the time with my kids. So people just looked at what I'm doing and thought I was retired. But I, my main business is a real estate company called Metros Capital and do all sorts of things, providing housing for people, either multifamily or renovated homes, or even now new homes. We're starting to actually help people rebuild here in Los Angeles because we had the devastating fires. And so we're just trying to do our part to, prevent people from getting ripped off and paying too much for their rebuilds and stuff like that. So that's been very rewarding. And then I have a couple other ventures that I'm involved in. One is a newsletter that I've written for 5 years now called Profit Plus, and we have 20,000 subscribers around the world. And the themes of Profit Plus are, how do you build wealth without compromising your integrity? And I also have a podcast called The Nick Halaris Show. I know not an original name, but I couldn't, all the names I was looking to get were taken because there's so many podcasts. So I was like, all right, let me just do this. But the idea of the podcast is to discuss important issues of the day, whether they're societal or political or economic, but not in some sort of boring way or an overly opinionated way, but through the lens of people who are actually trying to do something constructive about it. And so we'll take issues like gun violence, for example, and talk to people who are like actually trying to solve gun violence through different methods rather than just spout out an opinion about, some policy or another that we're supporting. So a lot of different things going on and trying to keep myself busy. I got my kids as well. So
Good stuff. And before I forget, yeah, I always made it a point with, my three kids, they're all adults now. And my original career was accounting, so I can do the math to figure out why they're adults now, but it still bothersome to me. I'm like, how in the world are you this age? It just drives me crazy. But I made it a point, as much as I could, at least a couple times a year for each of them when they were all in school to attend one of their field trips or in-day school things or something like that. And I would show up and I know this will resonate with you. It was kind of the same kind of view, like, oh, you're retired because you're here, you're a dad and you're here. Because typically you wouldn't see a lot of dads there. Even I would go to one of the minor league teams in Toronto, the Toronto Marlies, so they would have a field trip. So I would go there. I'm like, oh yeah, 11 a.m. hockey game. Okay, where do I sign up? Let's go. And I'll burn a vacation day for this, or even take an unpaid day. It's like, why not? This is cool. So I'd be there, and there'd be, obviously all the kids, and there'd be like maybe four parents, and I was usually the only guy there. So, all the teachers and the moms and all, they're looking at me like I'm this weird alien, like, what is it? We should study it. How can you do this? I took the day off. It was important to me. And I'm not saying it's not important to other dads. Yeah, I don't know what their circumstances are, but it was rare to see dads, and I think a lot of people probably thought that I was either independently wealthy or was retired or something like that, which wasn't the case. But going back to the work that you do, and I love the format of your show too. It's like I think that's such a huge thing for all of us to really hone in on is have a conversation. Seek to understand. Especially something as those hot button topics which get brought up every election season, which is pretty much every year, because 5 seconds after they call whoever won the presidency, the next year they start talking about 2028. It's like the dust hasn't even settled yet. We're already in campaign mode, and it's like, why don't we focus on how can we make humanity better? And how can we improve things and less focus on that. I mean, not that you shouldn't have debates. Debates are important. Those discussions should be had, but um, everything's very polarizing. And I think people have kind of lost the ability to have basically civil conversations. And I know there's a organization, SHRM, the Society of Human Resources Professionals. I know they're having a webinar coming up on the decrease and decline of civility in the workplace. And I've seen some of the reports, and it's like, no wonder no one wants to go to work and they want to be their own boss because the numbers of just how uncivilized people are in the workplace is downright frightening. And I've seen it. I don't go into every building and every office, but talking with people, it just seems like everyone is just, I don't know if it's unaddressed anger, unaddressed trauma from the pandemic. There's a combination of things, and I know you're seeing it too. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it goes to this phenomenon where which we created in our own culture, which to me is like one of the most dangerous things that you could possibly do in a democratic society, which is that we made words and ideas become dangerous because of cancel culture. And so we've like upped the ante so far about what you can and can't say that it's gotten to a point where it's in some cases it's sort of absurd. You've eliminated the possibility for people to have intelligent debate about items because you've labeled some things as so outrageous that you can't speak about them. And there are certain things obviously that you don't want to say, like especially in a workplace environment, right? Like you don't want to come off and say incendiary things or, hateful things. Like there is a point where your speech should be regulated, but we just went too far in that direction. And I actually think culturally, the West at least is kind of going back in the other direction where we're opening ourselves back up to civil discourse. It's funny, when I first started my newsletter, it was in March of 2020, right at the pandemic started. And I had called it originally, like the first 10 issues of it was a civic dawn. And one of the things I was writing about at that time was that, man, we really have to bring back this ability to engage in rational debate. And I think it's true today. I think we actually are headed in that direction. Like one of the things that doing the podcast has taught me over the last couple of years is that there really are a lot of people in the world who are attempting to constructively engage with our problems without getting into this incendiary, us against them kind of mentality and saying, okay, what can we do here to make a difference? What are the two sides actually fighting about? And where is the middle ground or where's the compromise? And so I'm actually more optimistic today than I was when I started the newsletter. Because I think we are going in the other direction. And I've just met so many people who are working to make a positive difference in the world.
Yeah, we need more and more people like that. And I'm with you. I think, quite frankly, I think the majority of people are. I think a lot of them are just they kind of timid and fearful about entering into the ring because they don't want to get canceled per se, or they don't want to just completely get unraveled by somebody that isn't necessarily open to having a discussion about things. And I think back to both of my parents were in organizations that had unions. My mom was a union steward when she was working, and so I grew up in a union type of environment. I am one to that leans towards create an environment where you don't need a union, but that's a completely different discussion. But at the end of the day, it's whenever there's a situation, it's like, okay, what do we have? Like you mentioned a moment ago. Okay, what do we agree on? Okay, let's get some momentum here. Let's get those things that way. Yes, we agree X, Y, Z. Yeah, that we're both in agreement on that. That makes sense. Okay, here, let's hammer those details up. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, those are good. Okay, and then it narrows it down to the handful of things that come up and go, all right, and and have an open conversation and under. understand, like when, especially, when you think about an organization where, people are threatening to go on strike because they want more money. I get it. Things are a little pricey, and they have been for a while, and I anticipate for the next year or so they'll continue to be, depending on what you're looking at. So, people are like, well, I need more money, and the organization in many cases are going, okay, we can do that to a certain extent, but we can't do it to that because otherwise we're losing money. And if we lose money, we're not going to pay you anything because we're not going to be here. So there has to be some, back and forth. And I think the more open and, I don't want to say vulnerable, but transparent that you are, and okay, why do I feel this way about gun control, whatever it happens to be? Why is this important? And a lot of it is driven by worry, fear, concern. They want to make sure that they're protected, or the people that are on the fence of they don't want to ever see any guns anywhere ever again. There's reasons why they don't want to, because they don't want innocent people dying. Both are, arguments that, can be discussed and sorted out, and come up with some solutions. But I'm with you. I have hope that without all the noise and all that, I think people are starting to just start to tune that out. Whether it's Hollywood actors that are promoting certain candidates, I think people are going, it doesn't matter who you endorse. I'm going to vote for how I want to vote because I've done the research and this candidate aligns the most with the policies and procedures that I support. And I think that people are tired of, the talk shows and all the other stuff because it's polarizing. I think people are getting allergic to it, and I think they want to have more open dialogue. And we're starting to see that. I mean, even the other day, I saw it on social media. Wasn't any, because I tend to avoid politics and I don't really follow any of it, but there was a conservative radio and TV host that was interviewing somebody that would be from what is kind of classified as a liberal friendly um, cable news network. And they had a down to earth conversation. And, both on different, they're both completely opposites in many ways, but they had a conversation. I watched it and I sat back and I go, okay, I know that doesn't get ratings, unfortunately, but that was really good. And I hope that a lot of people catch that because it was a really good dialogue. Because it's easy for us to say da 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 da, but you set somebody in a room across from each other, all of a sudden you see a little bit more civility. Here's a case in point, and I'll get your thoughts on this. A few weeks ago, the president was in the state of Michigan, announcing some new military funding and stuff for Selfridge Air Force Base in Michigan. Governor Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, and the president, not exactly on the same page. There's been a lot of things that have been said by both individuals towards each other that were not pleasant, but they were very positive. The president invited her to speak. I guess she wasn't scheduled to speak at this event, but she was there, and he said, "Come over and speak." And I think she kind of got thrown off by that. And I think that is uh, for both sides. It's like, yes, we have our differences, but you know what? We're all human beings, and we're all here to help humanity and our country and everywhere else. And I hope we see more of that because the stuff that we've been seeing, again, I think people are getting allergic to it. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I completely agree. And it's funny, I grew up like a couple miles from Selfridge Air Base. I've been there many times. There used to be really cool air shows there. So familiar ground for me. And I think I've been writing about this for several years. I think there's a silent majority in the West, in America for sure, but probably everywhere, which is not really being represented by either of the political parties here in this country, for example, that is looking for a return to civility, a return to rational debate, and actual practical progress on key issues. And I feel like the politicians who like key into that energy are going to do really well in the next cycle. that's what the majority position is looking for. They're exhausted after COVID, after all the stuff, the wars that are, ongoing in the world and the economic uncertainty unleashed over the last 5 years. People are looking to get practical and to get people away from this like overly emotional stuff. So I agree. And to bring it back to business, like it's concerning that this type of dynamic is evident. I'm a little removed from big business because I've been an entrepreneur for the last 15, 16 years. But this seems like the exact opposite phenomenon you'd want. Like if you were running a business, you would definitely wouldn't want your employees to be engaging with each other with that kind of fear-based approach to communication where you're walking on eggshells. And there's like a really interesting contra. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the hedge fund manager Ray Dalio, but he created this like completely transparent workplace. Now that might have its own problems because there are certain sort of social truths that you don't necessarily want to share everything with everyone. But if you're running a hedge fund, actually, you do want to have this kind of like brutal honesty approach because it's the only way to test the integrity of your thinking. But maybe it's sort of somewhere in between the two extremes, right? You've got the Dalio approach, which is 100%. You can say anything to anyone, and there can be no consequences to it. And then there's the walking on eggshells, and somewhere in between is where we need to end up to have businesses be at their best.
Yeah, and I think that's where, again, I have some hope because more and more organizations are they're looking for different ways. Like, okay, our employees aren't engaged, we're having trouble retaining them. What do we need to do? And, they've tried the old methods that aren't really working anymore. And of course, we have the dynamics of multiple generations. And again, that's just another example of you need to be able to understand other points of view because if you are a baby boomer aged, your viewpoints on things might be different than Gen Z or millennial. Gen X, which I am, I just point the finger and laugh at all of you. And it's like, you guys do whatever you want. We're just going to go over here and do our work. But we're very sarcastic in nature, us Gen X people. So we're quite feral too, because I think the last generation that drank from the water hose in the backyard. So we've already been introduced to all kinds of chemicals and bacteria and all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, I think going back to we talked about this a little bit in the pre-show as well. There's that entrepreneurial spirit, and I tell people a lot of times, especially if they're having a difficult time at work, like I want to launch my own business. I'm like, okay, all right, well, what will it be? What do you think the world needs that you can offer? And if sometimes they're really clear because they've thought about it, they've mapped it out, and they've done a lot of work on it. I'm like, okay, well, you know what? It's better to do it and fail than not do it and fret about never trying it. So I'm always one to encourage people to go for it. Try to have a safety net if you can. Don't ruin your family if you can. Avoid it if possible. But ultimately, it just comes down to deep down, understanding what people want or and sometimes people don't know what they want. But when it comes to being an entrepreneur and being successful, you can do that on your own business, but you know what? You can also do that while you're working with an organization. You can have an entrepreneurial spirit in how you do your job. And I've seen people do that. And, I go, you could go on your own and do something similar. And they said, you know what, I remember one guy in particular said this not too long ago. He said, yeah, I know I could do that, but you know what? I have a bigger impact here because I can impact more people. They have more customers here that I can impact than I could probably handle on my own. So I'm going to do it here. I'm like, okay. It's like, thank you. There's that spirit, and we've got that spirit everywhere, but I think a lot of it is suppressed sometimes by just the design of the managers and the leadership, but sometimes again, and I remind people of this too. It's like your manager's really struggling right now, right? Do you understand that? Yeah, he doesn't know what he's doing. Yeah, but how would you feel if you didn't know what you were doing? What would that feel like for you going home? Like, oh, I'd feel pretty bad. Yeah, so maybe help him out. You don't have to say, I know you're struggling, but just offer to help and take a little burden off of them. All of a sudden, you start putting the human back into the workplace, and next thing you know, you start seeing some improvements.
Yeah, totally. And I really like this idea of using the principles of entrepreneurship sort of wherever you are. This is it, entrepreneurship is, narrowly defined as, starting businesses, but the ideas, the ethos, the spirit of entrepreneurship is much greater than that. And it's useful in literally all areas of life. And so I've actually been writing a lot about that in the newsletter because I think if you just take a few things, like I'll just give you a few examples of the things that I think people could take into school, into their jobs, into anything that they're trying to do. One is what I call sort of extreme responsibility. Act like an owner. So even if you're not an owner, act like one. And it's hard, right? Part of the reason we have this employee engagement problem, which maybe we get into in a minute, is like it's hard to act like an owner when you have these corporations that are so wildly skewed, where the executives make, 300 times what the employees make. Like that's a societal issue that is worth, addressing at some point. But let's say you do work at a good corporation, you feel attached to it. You can always act like an owner. Get yourself in that shoes. And when you start to do that, man, people notice right away. You start taking on responsibility that's not yours, going the extra mile, checking in on people that need to be checked in on, even if they don't work for you, helping people that are on your team or even not on your team. You start doing all these different things than just like, hey, what's my job? Okay, I finished my job, I'm going home. But when you act like an owner, you start doing all kinds of other things, which these corporations value. And it's like, that's like a fast track to like making it to the next level. Another one is another entrepreneurial practice that I've been talking a lot about is called relentless follow-up. I learned this from one of my mentors, and it's actually super useful in real estate because real estate, there's sort of like mini gatekeepers and mini masters, but relentless follow-up is the idea that like you're just not going to take no for an answer. If you need to get something done, you're going to make sure it gets done. It doesn't mean to be a jerk or anything like that. It's just every day you're going to make sure that whatever whoever needs to do it, whatever needs to happen, if it's on you, if it's on someone else, you're there to just make sure it gets done until it gets done. And then boom. And then the last one that I think the last entrepreneurial principle that people should take into their life is sort of what I call it either like continuous proactivity or opportunity seeking mindset. It's something like that. And the idea is that what you learn as an entrepreneur is that there's opportunities everywhere and you can make them. All you do is you kind of just have to have an open mindset instead of a closed mindset. Like a lot of the problem with our schooling system and our employment tracks is that we get we get rewarded for like be doing what we're told. But in truth, what you learn as an entrepreneur and in creative fields like art, musicians and things, is that you can create these opportunities, and that's where real value is made and real wealth is made, is when you create stuff. And all it is a mindset. It's like keeping your eyes open for that connection, man. If you're in sales, like, man, just meet someone at the gym, meet someone playing tennis, like, you're always have it. You're not trying to be transactional with people, but you're just open to the world. What can I, who can I connect here? What can I do? How can I add value? And if you start bringing those three things into your job, you're gonna go move up pretty fast.
Yeah, and it also gives you the exposure, and I always encourage people to do this. It's like understand the entire DNA of your company, no matter what you're working on. You could be, front lines in the basement kind of thing, but get a big understanding of all the facets of your company, if at all possible, because what happens then is if for one day you are actually able to run that company or another company, the exposure you have to it is amazing. Or you go out on your own. You all of a sudden, yeah, okay, I worked in accounting, but I, hung out with people in marketing and sales and engineering and all this, and I have all this knowledge. And what it may end up doing for you is give you some interest on, yeah, maybe I want to try this career or I want to do this. And of course you can, and if you have the heart for it, then you should. And and before we wrap up, I definitely want to take you up on the employee engagement side of things because, we see the stats. Gartner releases a report all the time, and every new report, it just looks more and more bleak. And I know a lot of the things we've talked about today cover that, but what are some of your observations on employee engagement, and what can we do as a first step, or maybe even the first few steps that can help kind of turn the tide on that? Because ultimately, I know this, you know this too. Not everybody is wired to be, an entrepreneur in that they're out running their own business. That's just not for them. And they know it but they're frustrated. But I think that again, everyone can be an entrepreneur in their own business and be more engaged. And if your employer's not engaging you, maybe you should engage them. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think zooming out, and another thing that I've been writing and podcasting a lot about is what I call sort of the epidemic of selfishness. And this is a cultural phenomenon, and anyone who grows up in America for sure, and probably true in Canada and large parts of the Western world, is you're exposed to so much of this individualistic spirit. And there's much to be admired and much to love about individualism, right? We want to celebrate humanity and the value of each person, the unique value of each person, and the incredible potential of each person. But I actually think we've gone too far in the celebration of this. And this goes back maybe 3 or 4 decades, maybe longer than that, after the last, big global crisis with the war, World War II and stuff, when people really had a collective mindset, when people were willing to have shared sacrifices for some greater cause and make the ultimate sacrifice in many, many cases around the world. And what I've been trying to do with people who are struggling with things like employee engagement is to try to get them to start to shift their mindset away from this self-oriented, this selfish-oriented thing. So it's, in the case of an entrepreneur, for example, like someone who's trying to pursue entrepreneurship, the question is, why? You're trying to get rich, trying to get famous, you're trying to have freedom. Those are all interesting and they're all motivating forces. But a better motivating force is that, hey, I have an idea to make the world a better place, and I'm motivated to make that contribution. And whatever financial rewards may come with that, so be it. I want people to be excited about making, finding financial freedom. But the better mindset is, what kind of contribution can I make? How can what my daily activities are, be a benefit to somebody besides myself? And if you really look, if you zoom out, like businesses, that's what they are. They're there to serve something. A business serves a need, it serves a want. Ideally, it serves a need because, like, hey, we have all kinds of wants, but there's a lot of people who have needs that aren't met. And I feel like just making that mindset switch has so many benefits, psychological benefits. You feel better about what you're doing. And I'm convinced that in this sort of moving forward, this is what business is going to be about, is how do we serve, and less about how do I get mine, how do I get my mansion. All the stuff you see if you go on Instagram and look at like wealth influencers, they're all just like, hey, look at me and my private jet. Do you want to have this too? I'm convinced there's a better way.
I agree. When I think back to, the legends like Jim Rohn and, all the others that, would say, you help enough people, you're going to be taken care of. And I love how you said, I'm going to do this because I know it's going to be beneficial to people. The financial situation will take care of itself, and I will have everything that I need and some stuff that I want too. But I think if you get up in the morning going, okay, how am I going to serve today? Boy, does that make for some really, really good days. So I've loved this conversation. Nick, could talk to you hours on this. So how can people find out more about you, your show, and everything else?
Yeah, likewise, really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks again for having me on. The best place to find me is just my website, which is nickhalaris.com. You can sign up for the newsletter for free and learn about the podcast and the various businesses, real estate businesses that I'm involved in. And if you're interested in any of this stuff, would love to have you as a reader of the newsletter, and please sign up.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely have that in the show notes. So thank you again for being you and all this amazing work. Really loved our talk today.
Likewise, thanks.